The gavel hadn't even settled on the desk when Judge Judy's voice ripped through the studio like a lightning strike. A roar, sharp, cutting, unforgiving, echoed off the walls, sending shivers through the air. "Don't you dare talk over me!" she thundered, her finger stabbing forward like a weapon. The audience gasped, a collective intake of breath that felt heavier than the slam of wood on oak. Cameras zoomed in, catching every twitch, every tightened jawline. For a moment, it didn't feel like a television show. It felt like the eruption of a volcano, unpredictable, dangerous, impossible to look away from. Judy had always been known for her sharp tongue, but this was something different. It wasn't the usual dismissive sarcasm that made viewers smirk from their couches. It was rage. Raw, seething rage, breaking through the polished exterior of television authority. You could see the tension ripple through the rows of onlookers, as if each person wondered, had the queen of the courtroom finally gone too far? And then, there was Jasmine. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't so much as blink under the storm raining down on her. Her face remained still, eyes fixed, hands calm, body language whispering a single unspoken message. I am not afraid. That silence was deafening, more powerful than any counter-yell could have ever been. The camera cut back and forth, the split screen framing the clash like a painting of two worlds colliding, one burning with fire, the other frozen in unshakable ice. Viewers at home were already reaching for their phones, fumbling to record, to post, to share. Because they knew, this wasn't just entertainment. This was history unfolding, live and unfiltered, in front of their very eyes. The scream replayed in their minds, the sting of authority gone unchecked. But it wasn't Judy's rage that people would remember. It was Jasmine's silence. That cold, cutting stillness that transformed the power dynamic instantly. The woman who was supposed to be humiliated was instead commanding the entire room without uttering a single word. Millions would replay this moment in disbelief, dissecting it frame by frame, heartbeat by heartbeat. And yet the world hadn't seen anything yet. Because what came next wasn't shouting. It wasn't chaos. It wasn't more of the same. It was silence so cold, it burned hotter than fire. To understand why this single eruption mattered so much, you have to see beyond the flash of tempers and the soundbite-ready moment. Judge Judy wasn't just another television personality. She was an institution, a towering figure of authority whose courtroom theatrics had shaped decades of cultural memory. For millions of Americans, her word was law, her voice the final gavel that silenced debate. She represented order, decisiveness, and a kind of sharp-edged certainty that viewers had grown to expect, an image of authority wrapped in no-nonsense bravado. And then came Jasmine Crockett, rising, unapologetic, a new face of political grit and modern authenticity. She was no stranger to confrontation. Her career had been forged in spaces where she was often underestimated, dismissed, or attacked. Yet here she stood, not just as a participant in a television spectacle, but as a representative of a generation that valued clarity over theatrics, dignity over dominance, authenticity over arrogance. That is what made this clash electric. It wasn't merely a celebrity shouting match, it was symbolic warfare. On one side stood the legacy of command through fear, a generation that believed authority was proven by volume and certainty. On the other side stood Jasmine, embodying a shift toward a new style of leadership, measured, unshaken, rooted not in intimidation but in principle. The stakes were enormous. This was live television, streaming across platforms, cutting through living rooms, bars, and offices. Every gesture, every raised eyebrow, every pause was broadcast in real time. There was no room for rewrites, no chance to undo what the world would see. If Jasmine faltered, if she broke under Judy's scream, it wouldn't simply be a moment of embarrassment. It would be ammunition for critics, confirmation for those eager to dismiss her as unprepared, too green, too fragile for the spotlight. But silence, her silence, shifted the ground beneath their feet. The audience could feel it, though they couldn't yet explain it. Something about refusing to play Judy's game disrupted the script. People watching at home leaned forward, sensing that this wasn't going to be another easy takedown where Judy got the last word. The tension was generational. It was ideological. It was personal. And beyond the studio walls, America was watching with eyes wide open. Some saw Judy's eruption as a defense of old-school authority. Others saw it as proof that power unchecked always exposes itself. But nearly everyone could agree on one thing. Jasmine's calm, her refusal to engage in the shouting, was not weakness. It was control. That is why the moment carried such weight. It was more than a scream. It was a collision of worldviews broadcast to millions. A collision that asked, which vision of authority would prevail in the American imagination? The one that screamed the loudest? Or the one that stood silently, letting dignity speak louder than words? What happened next would tilt that balance in a way no one could have predicted. Because while Judy's fire seemed unstoppable, Jasmine's composure was about to prove that silence could cut deeper than any shout. And yet, nobody could predict how Jasmine would respond when pushed this far. For decades, Judith Schindlin, better known to the world as Judge Judy, was a force of nature. A retired Manhattan family court judge turned daytime television star, she carved her empire with a style so unmistakable it became its own brand, blunt, sharp, unforgiving. She didn't just preside, she dominated. With her clipped New York accent and her rapid-fire delivery, she was less a dispenser of rulings than a human thunderclap, one that could silence a courtroom with a glare and a single, cutting sentence. Audiences loved it. In an age of uncertainty, Judy provided something simple: absolute certainty. She was the kind of figure who made viewers believe there was still a place where right was right, wrong was wrong, and anyone foolish enough to test her patience would be swiftly and publicly humiliated. That humiliation, in fact, became a kind of entertainment currency. Millions tuned in daily not just to see the cases, but to witness the spectacle of Judge Judy dismantling someone with a quip so lethal it could trend before trending even existed. But behind that sharp-edged entertainment was a contradiction. Judy was revered as a champion of justice, straight-talking, incorruptible, a cultural icon who didn't bow to political correctness or hesitation. Yet that same fire often blurred into arrogance. She rarely tolerated nuance, cutting off explanations with her famous hand wave, delivering judgments before the full story had even been told. Her courtroom wasn't a space for dialogue. It was a stage where her authority was never in doubt, and her word was final. That dynamic worked when her opponents were everyday citizens with little platform to fight back. But when the stage shifted, and the person across from her wasn't a nervous litigant, but a rising political figure with composure to match, the imbalance began to crack. It's important to understand that Judy's power was performative as much as it was judicial. Television rewarded her volume, her bite, her refusal to bend. For years, challengers wilted under her stare because they had been cast, often unknowingly, as supporting characters in her show. Nobody dared flip the script. And so Judy's legend grew. The queen of the courtroom, the slayer of excuses, the voice of absolute authority in a noisy world. But arrogance has a way of planting seeds of downfall. The very qualities that made Judy a cultural icon, her sharp tongue, her dominance, her unwillingness to concede, also left her blind to the possibility that one day someone would not only withstand the storm, but turn it back against her. The cracks were subtle at first. Critics noted her tendency to dismiss legitimate arguments too quickly, to lean on intuition rather than patience. Others saw her humor edge into cruelty, the entertainment of her dismantlings beginning to feel more like unchecked ego than righteous justice. Yet she never slowed down. Why should she? The ratings were steady, the audience loyal, the brand bulletproof. Until Jasmine Crockett. For Judy, Crockett was supposed to be just another name, another opponent to dominate, another foil to her unrelenting persona. But Jasmine was not cut from the same cloth as Judy's usual adversaries. She was sharp, measured, unwilling to fold beneath theatrics. And unlike the anonymous faces who had come before her, Jasmine had her own platform, her own following, her own credibility. The silent defiance she displayed in that viral moment was more than composure. It was rebellion against the very formula Judy had perfected. That's why Judy's scream mattered so much. It wasn't just anger. It was the sound of a strategy backfiring. The scream revealed what the polished image had concealed for years, when control slipped from her grip. Judy's power was less about justice and more about dominance. She wasn't defending fairness. She was defending herself. For years, her voice silenced challengers, but not this time. Long before her name trended across the globe, long before her composure on live television stunned millions, Jasmine Crockett's story began in a place far removed from flashing cameras and viral clips. She was born into a life defined not by privilege, but by persistence. The path laid before her was not paved with shortcuts or safety nets. It was carved through struggle, sharpened by sacrifice, and illuminated by a relentless determination to rise higher than anyone thought possible. From her earliest years, Jasmine absorbed lessons that would later shape her unshakable poise. She knew what it was like to be underestimated, to walk into rooms where her voice wasn't expected to matter, where her presence itself was questioned. But instead of retreating, she chose resilience. Each slight, each dismissal, became fuel. Her answer was always the same: to prepare harder, study longer, fight smarter. That determination guided her into public service, where she quickly built a reputation as a fighter for those whose voices were most often silenced. While others chased power for spectacle, Jasmine chased justice for people. Her career was not an accident. It was the product of countless late nights, endless battles with bureaucracies, and the courage to stand where others faltered. She learned to hold her ground, not with shouting or theatrics, but with precision. Every statement was measured, every move deliberate, every word anchored in the truth she carried for her community. It was here that the contrast between Jasmine and her adversaries became unmistakable. In a world that rewarded bluster, she chose calm intelligence. In a culture that often elevated volume over value, she let her preparation speak louder than any outburst ever could. That calmness was not passive. It was power disguised in restraint. It was a message to anyone watching. You cannot rattle me. You can move me. You cannot strip me of my dignity. And people noticed, slowly at first, then in waves. Supporters rallied behind her, not just because of what she said, but because of how she carried herself. She represented something rare in modern politics: authenticity without compromise. To immigrants, she was a symbol of belonging. To the overlooked, she was proof that dignity could not be denied. To the younger generation, she was a reflection of their hunger for leaders who listened as much as they spoke. Her rise was not meteoric. It was earned. Step by step, trial by trial, she built a foundation so strong that even the fiercest storm could not shake it. Each victory reinforced her reputation, but so did each defeat. Because when she stumbled, she did not hide. She learned. She adapted. She came back stronger. That resilience, more than any speech or headline, cemented her as a leader built for the long haul. So when she walked into that studio and took her seat across from Judge Judy, she was not merely a guest on a television stage. She was a woman whose entire life had been preparing her for confrontation. Not confrontation for its own sake, but confrontation as a crucible, a test of whether truth, dignity, and composure could withstand the glare of arrogance. The scream that erupted from Judy was not the first storm Jasmine had ever faced. She had heard louder, felt harsher, endured deeper. The difference this time was that the world was watching. Millions of eyes, millions of expectations, millions of people looking to see whether the young Congresswoman would shatter under the pressure or embody the very values she had carried all her life. And so she did what she had always done. She remained calm. She held her ground. She let the storm rage around her, refusing to let it inside. That silence, that unflinching steadiness, was not born in that moment. It was born in every challenge before it, every insult, every dismissal, every door slammed in her face, every test of whether she belonged. Every trial in her past prepared her for this single moment, the storm she didn't start, but was destined to finish. The silence was supposed to break her. That was Judge Judy's calculation. Turn up the volume, force a reaction, seize control of the room before anyone else could breathe. But when her first explosion met with Jasmine's stillness, Judy doubled down. Her voice climbed higher, sharper, slicing through the studio air with a fury that left no corner untouched. "Answer the question! Don't play games with me!" she barked, words snapping like a whip. Each sentence was delivered louder than the last, as if decibels alone could dismantle her opponent's composure. The cameras leaned in, capturing Judy's face flushed with heat, her hands cutting through the air like daggers. This wasn't the witty, cutting television judge audiences had come to expect. It was something rawer, angrier, a performance straining against the edges of control. The crowd shifted uneasily in their seats. Gasps gave way to murmurs, the tension humming like an electric wire ready to snap. Commentators on the sidelines exchanged glances, eyes widening at the spectacle unfolding. Everyone could feel it. The escalation wasn't just dramatic, it was dangerous. The air grew thicker with every interruption, every attempt by Judy to drown out the quiet power seated across from her. And yet, Jasmine didn't move. She didn't lift her voice to match Judy's. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't flinch, didn't even press her lips together in irritation. She simply watched, her expression unreadable, her body language steady as a stone in the storm. The louder Judy became, the more striking Jasmine's silence appeared. It was as if two entirely different universes had collided on live television. One fueled by fire and noise, the other by an unshakable calm that no outburst could penetrate. For the audience at home, the contrast was mesmerizing. They were used to seeing Judy's targets stumble, protest, plead. But Jasmine wasn't playing the role the script demanded. She wasn't the nervous defendant scrambling for approval. She wasn't the foil set up for public dismantling. Instead, she was rewriting the scene in real time, simply by refusing to participate in Judy's theatrics. And with every second that passed, the power dynamics shifted further. The more Judy raged, the smaller her authority began to feel. The camera angles betrayed her, amplifying the sweat on her brow, the tremor in her hand, the sharpness in her tone that now seemed less commanding and more desperate. Meanwhile, Jasmine's stillness grew larger, commanding the frame without a word, her silence louder than any rebuttal could have been. By now, the commentators were no longer whispering. They were riveted. The control Judy had relied on for decades was slipping, and everyone could sense it. Viewers scrolling through social media during the broadcast typed furiously, "She's losing it. Why is Crockett so calm? This is unreal." Clips began circulating before the segment even ended, audiences sharing the clash as if history were unfolding second by second. But inside the studio, all anyone could focus on was the duel of opposites, rage versus restraint, authority versus authenticity. Judy's voice thundered through the space like rolling drums, but Jasmine's silence became the bass note beneath it, deeper, steadier, unshaken. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the balance of sympathy began to tip. The more Judy shouted, the more the audience leaned toward Jasmine. The escalation had reached its peak. Judy's voice cracked slightly as she pushed one interruption too far, a shrill note ringing out that hung awkwardly in the air. For the first time, she seemed to realize that the harder she fought, the more she was losing. Yet she couldn't stop. Decades of dominance demanded she press on, that she overwhelm her opponent by sheer force of will. But across from her, Jasmine remained unmoved. Her eyes locked forward, her hands folded loosely, her silence unbroken. The shouting only made what came next more devastating. For what felt like an eternity, Jasmine had said nothing. The storm of Judy's rage had rolled through the studio in waves, louder, harsher, more desperate with every outburst. But storms, no matter how violent, eventually lose their force. And when Judge Judy's final shout cracked through the air, hanging awkwardly in silence, Jasmine finally shifted. Not much. A small movement, the subtle straightening of her shoulders, the soft inhale of breath. But in that stillness, the entire room leaned forward. Everyone knew. This was the moment. Her eyes lifted, steady and unblinking, locking directly onto Judy's. No trace of fear, no hint of irritation. Just clarity, as sharp as glass. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. When Jasmine spoke, it was calm, icy, devastatingly precise, like the first drop of rain after unbearable heat. "Judge," she began, her tone measured, every syllable controlled. She said, letting the single word settle in the air. The pause itself was power, commanding attention before she even finished her thought. "I understand you're used to being the loudest voice in the room, but loud doesn't mean right, and volume doesn't equal truth." The audience reacted instantly. Gasps, then a ripple of stunned murmurs, like a wave rolling through the studio. Judy blinked, momentarily thrown, her jaw tightening as she prepared to fire back. But Jasmine wasn't finished. She leaned forward slightly, her voice low, almost intimate, forcing everyone to lean closer to catch each word. "You can scream at me. You can try to cut me off. You can even call me every name in the book. But what you can't do is change the facts. And the fact is this." She paused again, her silence stretching, pulling the audience to the edge of their seats. "I'm not here to play a role in your show. I'm here to tell the truth." The silence that followed was seismic. For years, Judy had thrived on controlling the script, silencing opponents before they could finish a thought. But Jasmine had just turned that script inside out. She wasn't the defendant. She wasn't the foil. She wasn't here to entertain. She was here to stand, unbroken, in the face of fire. Judge Judy's face hardened. Her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing as she searched for an opening. But Jasmine wasn't giving her one. She continued, voice steady, words falling like stones in a pond. "Respect isn't measured by how loud you shout at people. Respect is earned when you listen, when you engage, when you recognize that dignity doesn't crumble under pressure. You can raise your voice, Judge. I'll raise the standard." That line hit like a hammer. The studio audience erupted. Applause, cheers, even shouts of agreement breaking through the tension. It was no longer just a confrontation. It was a performance. A reversal, a turning of the tide so complete it seemed almost cinematic. Judy tried to interject, to seize back control, but the cracks were showing. Her interruptions now sounded shrill, brittle, ineffective. Every time she attempted to thunder, Jasmine met her with silence or a calm, surgical phrase that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. "Justice," Jasmine continued, her tone rising just slightly, enough to ride the swell of audience energy, "isn't about intimidation. It isn't about embarrassing people until they fold. It's about fairness. It's about truth. And sometimes, the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't need to scream. The eruption that followed nearly drowned out Judy's attempts to respond. Applause thundered. Cameras shook as audience members stood, clapping, cheering. The commentators on the sidelines exchanged stunned looks, some shaking their heads in disbelief. They weren't just witnessing a debate. They were watching the collapse of an icon under the weight of her own theatrics, dismantled not by aggression, but by composure. Judy's fire sputtered. Her eyes darted, her hands fidgeted, her voice faltered as she struggled to regain the dominance she had never before lost. But the balance of power was gone. Every glare, every quip, every attempt to cut Jasmine off only made her look smaller, pettier, more desperate. The queen of the courtroom had met an opponent she couldn't outshout. Jasmine, on the other hand, sat taller now. Every word she spoke landed with the weight of inevitability, like stones locking into place. "You wanted me rattled," she said finally, her voice calm but resolute. "But I won't give you that satisfaction. Because Nitty doesn't bow to arrogance, and truth doesn't need a raised voice to be heard." The audience was on its feet. The eruption was no longer just applause, it was a standing ovation. The cameras captured Judy's face, flushed and unsettled, her legendary composure nowhere to be found. For the first time in memory, she looked small against the very stage she had built. And Jasmine? She looked untouchable. Not because she had shouted louder, but because she hadn't shouted at all. Her mic drop wasn't a single line. It was the steady rhythm of restraint, the devastating calm of someone who knew exactly who she was and why she was there. For decades, Judy's voice had silenced challengers, but in this moment, it was silence itself, wielded by Jasmine, that became the most powerful sound of all. The cameras cut, the commentators scrambled to put words to what they had just witnessed, and the audience buzzed with disbelief. The storm had ended, and Jasmine had not only survived it, she had transformed it into a victory. But the real firestorm was only beginning. Online. The moment the cameras cut and the episode aired, the digital world ignited like a match dropped in dry grass. Within minutes, hashtags began storming their way up the charts. Hashtag Coldest Crockett, Judy vs. Jasmine, and the most viral of them all, hashtag The Cold Response. Twitter feeds were flooded with clips, slowed down and remixed, as millions replayed that single exchange where Judy's voice cracked with fury and Jasmine's silence cut sharper than any blade. TikTok became a stage of its own. Creators across the globe reenacted the scene, some parodying Judy's explosive rant, others reverently mimicking Jasmine's frozen composure. Edits layered dramatic music over Jasmine's still face, framing her as the embodiment of unbothered grace. Teenagers, activists, comedians, even corporate accounts jumped on the trend. Everyone wanted a piece of the cultural moment. On Instagram, fan pages sprang up overnight, captioning Jasmine's silence as the ultimate clapback without saying a word. Memes flew faster than they could be made. Judy's finger-pointing rage contrasted with Jasmine's calm stare, overlaid with lines like, "When they expect drama, but you bring dignity," or "How to win an argument without opening your mouth." Then came the celebrities. Musicians, actors, and political figures chimed in. A-list stars posted the clip with fire emojis and captions like, "Teach me your ways, Jasmine." Activists praised her for modeling strength without succumbing to rage. Even rival politicians who rarely agreed on anything found themselves publicly acknowledging the raw impact of her composure. News outlets couldn't resist. Morning shows played the footage on repeat, commentators dissecting every pause, every flicker of Judy's frustration, every ounce of Jasmine's stillness. Headlines blared, "When silence speaks louder than shouting," and Jasmine Crockett redefines power on live TV. Think peace, is poured in, some hailing it as a cultural reset, others warning it signaled a new standard for public debates. And yet, underneath the frenzy, a deeper validation surged among everyday viewers. People who had been shouted down in boardrooms, dismissed in classrooms, silenced at dinner tables, suddenly saw themselves in Jasmine. Her silence wasn't just television strategy, it was their story, their struggle, their quiet victory made visible for the world. In her, they felt vindicated. The phrase ultimate clapback trended not because Jasmine had insulted Judy, but because she hadn't. She had chosen something braver, letting the arrogance collapse under its own weight. Fans posted their own stories of choosing silence instead of rage, linking them with Jasmine's face. What had begun as entertainment morphed into empowerment. But as the clip crossed borders and languages, the meaning began to grow heavier. This wasn't just about one viral exchange. This was about how power is shifting, how authority rooted in fear and volume is crumbling before a new kind of strength. Something deeper was taking root. Yet beyond the memes, something deeper was taking root. When the lights dimmed and the echoes of the confrontation began to fade, it was tempting to frame what had just unfolded as a battle of personalities, Judge Judy's fire against Jasmine Crockett's ice. But Jasmine herself would not allow the moment to be trivialized as a duel of temperaments. She had never come to compete in theatrics. She had come to embody something larger. In the quiet aftermath, when cameras replayed the exchange in slow motion, audiences saw it clearly. This was never about who could shout louder or who could deliver the sharpest sting. It was about something deeper, justice versus arrogance, integrity versus intimidation. Jasmine's response had stripped away the illusion that power comes from dominating others. Instead, she revealed the higher truth. Real power is the ability to remain composed, even when the storm rages inches from your face. The lesson resonated far beyond the studio. Viewers across the country, and soon across the world, found themselves replaying not just Judy's scream, but Jasmine's stillness. They shared it, quoted it, held it up as proof that dignity could stand taller than rage. This, people wrote, is what leadership looks like. Jasmine never raised her voice, but she raised something far greater, the standard by which people would measure public figures from that day forward. Her calm intelligence, her steady refusal to be dragged into the mud, became a mirror in which viewers could see themselves, not as passive bystanders, but as people capable of rising above the noise in their own lives. Because the truth is simple, anyone can scream. Anyone can lash out, pound the table, demand attention. But it takes patience. It takes conviction. It takes true confidence to stay calm when provoked. Jasmine reminded the world that silence, when chosen deliberately, can echo louder than thunder. And in that truth lay the universal reflection. It wasn't just about one fiery television moment. It was about the storms we all face, the boss who belittles, the system that dismisses, the voice that tries to drown out our own. Jasmine's example whispered to every viewer, you don't have to meet fire with fire. You can meet it with clarity, with composure, with the kind of dignity that cannot be shaken. The world remembers who stayed calm in the storm. The world remembers who refused to be broken by noise. And in this case, the world will remember Jasmine Crockett not as the woman who matched Judge Judy's fury, but as the woman who transcended it. The crescendo of her lesson was unmistakable. Rage is temporary, but respect endures. Arrogance fades, but justice remains. And in the end, true authority doesn't come from who can silence the other. It comes from who can stand unshaken, speak truth, and let the silence itself carry the weight of victory. For the audience, there was pride in that revelation. Pride in seeing someone rise above the oldest power play in the book, shouting down the opposition, and prove that there is another way. Pride in knowing that patience is not weakness, that calm is not surrender, that dignity is its own unstoppable force. And so, as the credits rolled and the clip continued to spread across every screen, the story was no longer just about Judge Judy's scream. It was about the cold, unflinching, powerful silence that answered it. It was about the reminder that even in a world addicted to outrage, there is something stronger than volume. There is truth, there is dignity, there is calm. And that, Jasmine showed us, is how storms are not just survived, but conquered. Judge Judy screamed. Jasmine Crockett didn't. And that single decision, silence over fury, turned a heated clash into a viral moment the world could not look away from. The video's title promised a scream and a cold response, but what it delivered was a masterclass in restraint, in dignity, in the power of knowing when not to play the game. What we witnessed wasn't just television drama, it was a parable for our times. The loudest voice in the room isn't always the strongest. The one who interrupts isn't always the one who wins. Sometimes the true victor is the one who refuses to be shaken, who stands grounded while the storm tries to pull them apart. Jasmine showed us that truth needs no shouting. It stands tall on its own. And now that truth belongs to us. The clip has circled the globe, but its meaning only deepens when people carry it forward. If you believe dignity defeats arrogance, if you believe composure is more powerful than rage, then share this story. Let it ripple into conversations, into classrooms, into the hearts of those who still think yelling makes you right. Because here's the reality. Arrogance shouts, but it fades. Dignity whispers, and it endures. The scream was momentary. The silence became eternal. So the next time someone tries to shout you down, remember Jasmine. Remember the calm that froze a room. Remember that sometimes the coldest response is the loudest echo.